The morning my family left for Christmas without me, my father didn't even have the courage to say he didn't want me there. He just looked at his watch. That was always Douglas Bennett's favorite way of making somebody feel small. He didn't yell. He didn't slam doors. He checked the time, adjusted his cuff links, and acted like whatever was happening in front of him wasn't important enough to interrupt his schedule. I was standing in the driveway of our house outside Dayton, Ohio, with a suitcase in one hand and a red gift bag in the other. Snow had started coming down sometime before sunrise, the soft kind that made every suburban roof look peaceful, even when the people underneath them weren't. 3 vehicles were already running. My sister Madison leaned against Dad's black Range Rover with a paper cup from Starbucks tucked between her gloves. She had on a camel-colored coat that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and she was laughing about something with our mother, while one of Dad's assistants finished loading the luggage. I remember thinking I must have gotten the departure time wrong. "Are we leaving early?" I asked. Nobody answered right away. Dad finally glanced at me. "Claire, Silver Ridge is an investor weekend. I know. There are going to be board members there, suppliers, federal people, potential partners. I know that too." He gave me the same tight smile he used whenever he thought somebody was being difficult. "This weekend really needs to stay focused on people who can move the company forward." For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood him. I had spent 5 years as an officer in the United States Air Force. I was a captain. I worked in acquisition and contract integrity, which was a fancy way of saying that when private aerospace companies wanted taxpayer money, people like me made sure their promises matched reality. But in my father's world, none of that counted. Madison had an MBA, a corner office at Bennett Aeronautics, and her photograph in 3 regional business magazines. I had government housing for part of the year, a military paycheck, and a dress uniform my father once described as a very expensive way to avoid a real career. Madison took a sip of coffee and looked at my suitcase. "Oh, come on, Claire. Don't make this weird." "I'm not making anything weird." She walked over and handed me a small white bakery box tied with green string. "At least you'll have cinnamon rolls." I stared at the box. She smiled. "You know, while the adults talk business." That one landed harder than I wanted it to. Not because Madison had never insulted me before. She had. Usually with a smile. Usually just quietly enough that if I reacted, I would be the dramatic one. What hurt was seeing my mother standing 6 feet away, looking down at the snow. She knew exactly what was happening. "Mom?" Elaine Bennett pulled her coat tighter around herself. "Maybe this is for the best, honey. Your father's under a lot of pressure right now." There it was. The Bennett family motto, even if nobody had ever put it on a wall. Your father is under pressure, which meant everybody else was expected to absorb the damage. I looked at him. "So you invited me home for Christmas, had me bring gifts, let me pack for the weekend, and now you're telling me I'm staying here?" Dad exhaled through his nose. "Don't turn this into a family drama." Then he got into the SUV. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Madison climbed into the passenger seat and closed the door. Before the window went up, she leaned toward me. "For what it's worth, Claire, Dad just wants you to find something you're actually good at." The convoy pulled away a minute later. I stood there in the snow, holding a bakery box and a suitcase, while their taillights disappeared around the bend. I wish I could tell you I felt strong. I didn't. I felt stupid. 28 years old, an Air Force captain trusted to sit in rooms where multi-million-dollar decisions were made, and somehow my own family could still make me feel like the kid who had brought home a second-place trophy nobody bothered to put on the shelf. Then my phone vibrated inside my coat. Not my personal phone, my government phone. I pulled it out and saw the secure call indicator flashing across the screen. Air Force Acquisition Command. I stared at it for a few seconds. What my father didn't know, what nobody in those 3 expensive cars knew, was that for the last 11 weeks, one company had been causing serious concern inside our review team. Bennett Aeronautics, my family's company. The phone kept vibrating, and standing alone in that driveway, I finally answered. "Captain Bennett?" The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel Aaron Pike, Deputy Director for Acquisition Oversight at Wright-Patterson. He was the kind of man who never wasted words, especially on a secure line. "Yes, sir. We got the supplemental test data from Bennett Aeronautics." I looked down the empty road where my family's SUVs had disappeared. And a pause. Worse than we expected. That was the moment Christmas stopped feeling personal. I carried my suitcase back inside, set Madison's untouched cinnamon rolls on the kitchen counter, and went straight upstairs to the bedroom I had slept in since middle school. The room still looked almost exactly the way I had left it years ago. A faded Ohio State pennant above the desk, a dent in the closet door from when Madison threw a hairbrush at me when we were teenagers, and a small shelf holding trophies my mother never had the heart to throw away. Most of them were mine, none were from business school. I sat at the desk and opened my encrypted laptop. People hear military procurement and picture paperwork, forms, contracts, people in windowless offices arguing over numbers. Sometimes that is exactly what it is. But those numbers become aircraft parts, emergency systems, navigation equipment. Things real pilots trust when they are thousands of feet off the ground, with no room for somebody else's shortcut. That was why I had always taken the work personally, even when my family laughed at it. 3 years earlier, I had been assigned to a review after a contractor tried to substitute a cheaper fastener in an aircraft support assembly. On paper, the difference looked tiny, a few dollars per unit. During stress testing, one failed, then another. I still remembered the senior master sergeant who stood beside me in the hangar afterward and tapped the broken part with a wrench. Cheap gets real expensive when somebody's kid is flying the plane, Captain. I never forgot that. So when Bennett Aeronautics entered the final stages of an $80 million aerospace support program, I did something my father never knew about. I disclosed the relationship immediately. I requested removal from any decision where my family connection could create even the appearance of favoritism. Legal reviewed it. Ethics reviewed it. I was allowed to remain on the broader technical integrity team because my expertise was relevant, but every finding involving Bennett Aeronautics required independent verification. I had built a wall between Claire Bennett, the daughter, and Captain Bennett, the officer. My father would have laughed at that wall. He spent his entire career believing relationships existed to be used. The file in front of me contained 3 separate red flags. A durability test had been repeated after the first result failed to meet threshold, but the original failure wasn't clearly disclosed. One subcontractor's ownership information didn't match the certification paperwork, and several internal emails suggested senior management wanted engineering staff to streamline certain safety documentation before the final review. None of those things automatically meant fraud. That mattered. I wasn't looking for a reason to destroy my father. I was looking for the truth. And, if I'm being completely fair, part of me desperately wanted the truth to be harmless. Because no matter how angry I was, Bennett Aeronautics employed almost 400 people around Dayton. Some of them had worked there since I was a kid. I knew their families. I had sold Girl Scout cookies to their offices. Mr. Alvarez from machining had once changed my flat tire in a Kroger parking lot when I was 16. If my father had made bad decisions, I didn't want innocent people paying for them. That was the difference between accountability and revenge. My personal phone buzzed beside the laptop. For one stupid second, I thought maybe it was Mom. It was Madison. Asterisk left your charger in Dad's office. Guess you won't need it tonight, lol. Asterisk. I stared at the message, then turned the phone face down. The secure line rang again less than 10 minutes later. This time, the caller ID made me sit straighter. Asterisk Brigjen Daniel Mercer. Asterisk General Mercer had been one of my mentors since my second year in acquisition. He had a reputation for being brutally fair, which was another way of saying he made powerful people nervous. I answered. Captain Bennett. Merry Christmas, Claire. His tone was unusually casual. Merry Christmas, sir. Why aren't you headed to Silver Ridge? I hesitated. Sir? I'm speaking at the aerospace reception tonight. Your name is on my liaison roster. Of course it was. Silver Ridge wasn't only my father's investor retreat. The lodge was hosting several private industry events around the Regional Defense Symposium, and General Mercer was the senior Air Force guest. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. My family left without me. Another pause. They what? They decided the weekend was for people who could help the company. This time the silence lasted longer. When Mercer spoke again, his voice had changed. Not angry, controlled. Do you have your dress blues? I looked toward the garment bag hanging inside my closet. Yes, sir. Good. Be ready in 45 minutes. Sir, I can drive myself. No, there was something final in the way he said it. My staff car is already passing Beaver Creek. You're attending as my acquisition liaison. Whatever happened in that driveway stays personal. Whatever happens tonight stays professional. Understood? I swallowed. Yes, sir. Then he added something I still remember, word for word. Don't go there to prove your family wrong, Claire. Do your job. Let the truth do the rest. 45 minutes later, I stood in front of the mirror wearing the same Air Force uniform my father had spent years treating like evidence that I lacked ambition. I adjusted my collar, took one long breath, and walked downstairs. Outside, a dark government sedan was waiting at the curb, and for the first time all day, I wasn't wondering why my family had left me behind. I was wondering what would happen when they realized exactly who was arriving. Silver Ridge Lodge looked exactly like the kind of place my father loved. Old stone walls, massive fireplaces, dark wood beams, valets in wool coats, a Christmas tree in the main lobby that had to be 20 feet tall, covered in white lights and gold ribbon, with wrapped boxes underneath that were probably empty, but somehow still looked expensive. By the time General Mercer's car pulled beneath the covered entrance, the investor reception was already in full swing. I could hear jazz coming through the doors before I even stepped inside. Last chance to fake food poisoning, Mercer said without looking at me. I turned toward him. For half a second, I wasn't sure if a brigadier general had actually made a joke. Then the corner of his mouth moved. I'm kidding, Captain. Good, sir, because I was about to ask if food poisoning requires a medical waiver. That got a quiet laugh out of him, and weirdly, that helped. Not because I was suddenly relaxed. I wasn't. My stomach was tight enough to hurt. I had briefed colonels, engineers, lawyers, and federal acquisition teams without losing my composure, but walking into a room with my father in it still had a way of turning me into a 12-year-old girl waiting to hear whether she had disappointed him. That was the part nobody tells you about family. You can outgrow a house. You can outgrow a town. Sometimes it takes a lot longer to outgrow the voice somebody planted in your head. The ballroom doors opened. I walked in first. I saw Dad almost immediately. Douglas Bennett was standing near the center of the room beside a model display of one of Bennett Aeronautics' new support assemblies. He had a bourbon in his hand and 6 or 7 people around him, including 2 investors I recognized from industry briefings. Madison stood next to him in a dark green evening dress, talking to a man from a private equity firm. I caught the end of her sentence as I got closer. My sister's military, too, she was saying. Administrative side. Very stable. Great benefits. The man nodded politely. Madison laughed. She was never really built for business. Then she saw me. Her smile disappeared. Not slowly. Instantly. She excused herself and crossed the room so fast her heels clicked against the hardwood like somebody tapping out a warning. What are you doing here? No hello. No Merry Christmas. Just that. I was invited. By who? I looked over her shoulder. Someone you're about to meet. Madison folded her arms. You cannot do this tonight, Claire. Do what? Make some kind of statement. I almost admired the assumption. She honestly believed my entire presence existed in relation to her. I'm here for work. She looked me up and down, stopping at my uniform. Right, there was that smile again. The one designed to make sure I knew she didn't believe me. Claire, Dad has spent 3 years trying to get serious federal attention on this company. There are people here who actually understand aerospace procurement. Please don't start talking like you're part of that world. I opened my mouth. Then the room changed. You could feel it before anybody said anything. A few executives near the entrance straightened. One man quietly set his drink down. Another reached for his wife's elbow and turned her toward the doors. General Daniel Mercer stepped into the ballroom. Behind him were 2 Air Force officers, a civilian acquisition attorney, and a senior engineering advisor I recognized from the regional program office. My father saw him. The bourbon glass stopped halfway to his mouth. I had watched Douglas Bennett negotiate layoffs without blinking. I had seen him argue with bankers, suppliers, and attorneys. I had never seen his face go blank before. Daniel Mercer, he whispered. Madison turned toward me, then back toward Mercer, then back toward me again. That was the first moment she understood something was wrong. My father moved fast. He handed his drink to a server and walked toward Mercer with both hands open, smiling like they had been old friends forever. General Mercer. Douglas Bennett. We've been trying to arrange a meeting for months. Mercer shook his hand once. Mr. Bennett. Dad looked at me. The transformation was almost impressive. Claire. His entire voice softened. There you are, sweetheart. Sweetheart. I hadn't heard that word from him since I was maybe 9. We were wondering where you were. I looked at him. Were you? Something flickered behind his eyes. Madison jumped in. There was obviously some confusion this morning. There wasn't. Her face tightened. Mercer glanced between us but said nothing. That somehow made it worse for them. Dad forced a laugh. Well, family logistics. You know how Christmas gets. Then he turned toward a group of investors gathering nearby. My daughter Claire, Air Force. Madison added quickly, she works more on the administrative side. Mercer looked at her. Administrative? Madison's confidence slipped. I mean, that's what I was told. Mercer turned toward the people around us. Captain Bennett serves in acquisition and contract integrity. Her current work includes technical readiness, procurement risk, and ethical compliance review for aerospace support programs. Nobody said anything, so he kept going. She is also one of the officers assigned to the independent integrity review supporting the program Bennett Aeronautics is currently competing for. I watched my father's face. That was the moment. Not when he saw Mercer, not when he noticed my uniform. When he understood that the daughter he had left standing in the snow knew exactly what was happening inside the contract he believed would save his company. Madison actually whispered, "What?" Dad looked at me. "You're on the Bennett review? Part of the broader review team. You never told me." I wasn't allowed to. That answer seemed to offend him more than anything else. You're my daughter, and that's exactly why I disclosed the relationship and asked for additional ethics oversight. One of the board members nearby, a woman named Patricia Sloan, slowly lowered her wineglass. I knew her from company Christmas parties when I was younger. She looked at Dad. You knew Claire worked in acquisition? Dad didn't answer. Madison tried to recover. Well, whatever her role is, I'm sure there are safeguards. Claire obviously wouldn't be making decisions about her own family. That is correct, I said. There are safeguards. Dad stepped closer. Can we talk privately? His smile was still there. His eyes were not smiling. We moved several feet away toward an empty corridor beside the ballroom. The second we were out of easy earshot, his voice dropped. You should have told me. I legally could not tell you. Claire, this company employs hundreds of people. I know, then you understand what's at stake. I do. He studied my face. And then something changed. The anger disappeared. He reached up and touched my shoulder. You've always been the smartest one. I nearly laughed. 3 hours earlier, I had apparently contributed nothing to the family. Now I was the smartest one. Dad. No, listen to me. Whatever issues came up, they can be explained. Manufacturing schedules are messy. Testing is messy. People use the wrong language in emails all the time. You don't know what findings I've seen. I know my company. He leaned closer. All I'm saying is, don't let some technicality destroy what our family spent 30 years building. There it was. Not an apology. Not even concern about whether the company had done something wrong. Just a request. Family loyalty. The phrase people use when they want you to betray yourself for their convenience. I stared at him. Are you asking me to ignore a compliance issue because we have the same last name? His face changed immediately. Keep your voice down. That told me everything. And unfortunately for him, we weren't as alone as he thought. Patricia Sloan was standing near the corridor entrance. So was the civilian acquisition attorney from Mercer's team. Dad noticed them too. The blood drained out of his face. Claire, he said quietly, you're twisting my words. No, I'm making sure I understand them. General Mercer walked over. His expression told me he had heard enough. Captain Bennett. Yes, sir. Return to the reception. Dad looked at him. General, this is a family conversation. Mercer's voice stayed calm. No, Mr. Bennett. The moment you attempted to influence an officer assigned to an integrity review, it stopped being one. The ballroom seemed quieter now. People had noticed. Mercer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Bennett Aeronautics was already under enhanced review due to discrepancies in durability testing, subcontractor disclosure, and safety documentation. Those findings are being independently evaluated. Effective tonight, the company's participation in the current award process is being suspended pending formal review. Madison went completely still. Dad looked like he had been hit. You can't do this based on a conversation. We're not. Mercer's eyes stayed on him. The conversation simply confirmed why independent oversight matters. I looked at my father. For years he had asked what my career was worth, so I finally answered him. My uniform was never supposed to be worth anything to you, Dad. He stared at me. It was supposed to mean people could trust me when it mattered. And for the first time in my life, Douglas Bennett had nothing to say. The strangest thing about watching my father lose control of the room was that I didn't feel victorious. I thought I would. For years I had imagined what it might feel like if Douglas Bennett finally had to admit he was wrong about me. I figured there would be satisfaction in it, maybe even a little anger finally burning itself out. Instead, I just felt tired. General Mercer and I left the ballroom a few minutes later and walked down to a smaller dining room on the other side of the lodge, where a group of Air Force officers, civilian engineers, spouses, and support staff had gathered for Christmas dinner. Nobody cared who had the biggest company. Nobody was comparing watches or casually mentioning stock options between bites of prime rib. A tech sergeant from maintenance was arguing with a civilian engineer about whether the Browns would ever make a serious playoff run. Somebody's 8-year-old daughter was building a tower out of dinner rolls. One of the colonels had brought homemade pecan pie in a foil pan because, according to him, hotel pie is a federal crime. It was messy. It was normal. It felt more like family than most holidays I had spent in the house where I grew up. About halfway through dinner, a senior master sergeant named Luis Alvarez came over and asked if I remembered a component review from 2 years earlier. I did, barely. His son was a pilot. "You held that part," he said. I looked at him.
"The actuator housing?"
He nodded. Everybody was pushing to clear it because replacing the batch would have delayed delivery. You wouldn't sign. I remembered the meetings, the pressure, the phone calls from people telling me the failure rate was statistically acceptable. Alvarez pointed at me with his fork. "My kid flew an aircraft with the replacement parts 6 months later." Then he shrugged. "So I guess what I'm saying is, thanks for being a pain in everybody's ass." I laughed, but later, when I went back to my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and cried for the first time that day. Not because of my father, because someone had finally put words to what my job actually meant. The audit into Bennett Aeronautics began after New Year's. It lasted almost 7 weeks. The findings were bad, but not catastrophic enough to destroy the company. That mattered to me. Nearly 400 people depended on those paychecks, and most of them had nothing to do with my father's decisions. The board removed Douglas as CEO. Patricia Sloan was named interim chief executive and immediately brought in outside compliance counsel, replaced 2 senior managers, and froze several questionable subcontracting relationships. The company survived. My father's power didn't. Madison called me the night the board announced his resignation. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. "You happy now?" she said. No hello, classic Madison. No, Dad built that company from nothing, and he nearly damaged it by treating rules like obstacles. You embarrassed him. I was quiet for a second. "Madison," he asked an Air Force officer to bury compliance concerns. He was scared. "So was I when you left me standing in the snow." She didn't say anything. Then she whispered, "You really hate us." That surprised me. "I don't hate you." Could fooled me. "No, I just don't want to keep getting hurt and calling it loyalty." She hung up. For the next month, Dad called almost every other day. The messages changed depending on his mood. First came anger. "You've forgotten where you came from." Then guilt. "This company paid for your childhood." Then manipulation. "Your mother isn't sleeping." Then came the apologies. Sort of. "I'm sorry things got out of hand." "I'm sorry you felt excluded." Those were the kind of apologies that somehow still made the injured person responsible for being injured. I deleted them. Then, one Sunday morning in March, he left a different message. His voice sounded older. "I think I spent your whole life measuring you and your sister by what you could do for me." There was a long pause. That wasn't parenting. For once, he didn't ask me to call back. I saved that message. Not because it fixed anything. It didn't. My mother wrote me a letter a few days later. An actual handwritten letter on yellow legal paper, because she never trusted email. She apologized for staying quiet. That one hurt in a different way. She wrote, "I kept telling myself I was keeping the peace. I understand now that I was asking you to carry the cost of that peace." I read that sentence 3 times. I wasn't ready to forgive everything. But I finally understood something important. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. You can stop wishing someone harm without giving them permission to keep harming you. I started seeing a counselor through the base. At first, I felt ridiculous. I was an Air Force captain. I handled pressure for a living. Then my counselor asked me a question I couldn't answer. If your father never becomes the man you needed him to be, do you still get to have a good life? I sat there for a long time, because that was the real battle. Not the contract, not the ballroom, not even Christmas. It was learning to stop building my life around the hope that one day my father would finally look at me and say I was enough. And for the first time, I started believing I could be enough without hearing it from him. A year later, Christmas looked completely different. By then, I had been promoted to major and selected to help lead a larger acquisition integrity team. The promotion ceremony was small. No ballroom, no investors, no speeches about legacy. Just a few people from my unit, General Mercer standing in the back with his arms folded, and Senior Master Sergeant Alvarez shaking my hand afterward like I had finally joined some club nobody told me existed. "Don't get sentimental on us, Major," he said. "I'll try to remain unbearable. That's the spirit." I laughed harder than I probably should have. That Christmas, I didn't go back to Dayton. For a while, I felt guilty about that. There's something about the holidays in America that makes people believe every broken family should somehow become a Hallmark movie by December 25th. You're supposed to go home, sit around the same table, pretend old wounds are just funny stories now. But healing doesn't work on a holiday schedule. So I stayed near the base. A young airman in my office couldn't afford a flight home to Arizona. Another had just gotten divorced. One of our civilian analysts had lost her husband 2 years earlier and hated eating Christmas dinner alone. I invited them over. Then they invited other people. By Christmas Eve, there were 12 of us packed into my little house. Somebody brought smoked brisket. Someone else showed up with macaroni and cheese in a casserole dish big enough to feed a football team. Alvarez arrived carrying the same pecan pie he had defended the year before and announced, "Still better than hotel pie." We played cards. We argued about college football. One lieutenant burned the dinner rolls so badly we opened 2 windows in December, and nobody asked what anybody could do for them. That part mattered more than I expected. On the mantel was a framed photograph from my promotion ceremony. Next to it sat a stack of Christmas cards from coworkers, pilots, engineers, and people I had met through the years. One card came from a flight crew that had been affected by a safety review my team pushed through. It simply said, "Thanks for caring about the stuff nobody sees." I kept that one. There was also a package from my mother. Inside was the old Ohio State pennant from my childhood bedroom and a handwritten note. "I'm learning that loving someone also means respecting the boundaries they need. Merry Christmas, Claire. No expectations. Love, Mom." I sat at the kitchen table holding that note for a long time. Then I called her, not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. But because for the first time she had reached toward me without asking me to carry anything for her. Dad sent a card too. No excuses this time. Just "I'm still working on myself. I understand if that isn't enough yet." I put it in a drawer. Maybe one day we would have a different relationship. Maybe we wouldn't. I had finally stopped making my happiness depend on the answer. Later that night, someone knocked on the front door. It was one of our newest airmen, 20 years old, standing there with a grocery store pumpkin pie and an embarrassed look on his face. "Major Bennett? Sergeant Alvarez said you had room." I looked behind me at the crowded living room, the football game on television, the terrible Christmas music, and 12 people yelling about whether the gravy needed more salt. Then I opened the door wider. "We do." And that was when it hit me. A year earlier, I had stood outside in the snow believing being left behind meant I didn't belong. I was wrong. Sometimes being shut out of the wrong room is the first thing that shows you where you were meant to stand. And sometimes family isn't the people who tell you where your place is. It's the people who make room when you arrive. What Claire's story reminds us is that one of the hardest lessons in life is learning that being related to someone does not automatically give them the right to define your worth. Many of us spend years trying to earn approval from parents, siblings, employers, or communities that have already decided who they think we are. We stay quiet to keep the peace, excuse hurtful behavior because that's just how they are, and sometimes confuse loyalty with the obligation to tolerate disrespect. But there comes a point when protecting your dignity is not selfish, it is necessary. Claire did not win because she humiliated her family or used her position to get even. She won because she refused to become dishonest just to be accepted by people who had never truly respected her. She let her character, her work, and her consistency speak for themselves. As the old saying goes, you teach people how to treat you. Setting boundaries does not always mean cutting people out forever, and forgiveness does not require pretending nothing happened. Sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is step away, allow people to face the consequences of their own choices, and build relationships where respect does not have to be begged for. Life may not always give us a dramatic moment when everyone who underestimated us finally understands, but we can still choose integrity, surround ourselves with people who value who we are, and stop measuring ourselves through someone else's disappointment. If this story made you think about family, self-respect, or a time when you had to choose yourself after years of staying silent, share your thoughts or your own experience in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, please give the video a like and subscribe for more powerful stories about resilience, justice, and second chances. Wherever life finds you today, I hope the road ahead brings you a little more peace, a little more courage, and the kind of people who are always willing to make room for you.